Hello, and a very warm welcome to our webinar, From Hype to Impact, Capitalizing on the AI Revolution. The webinar is organized by Oakland's, the leading mid-market M&A advisory firm, helping entrepreneurs and evolving companies to reach their full potential. With some 850 people in 45 countries, we have closed more than 1,900 deals in the past 5 years and have an especially strong record in tech-related industries. My name is John Matthews, and I'm your host today. I'm Managing Director at Oakland's De Silva & Phillips and co-lead for the Oakland's AI Playbook. I'm joined today by my colleague, Joni Pitkäranta from Oakland's Finland, who will moderate the panel at the end. We anticipate a lively discussion today, but first, intro and setup for the day's proceedings. We'll have two fireside chats followed by the panel at the end. This has all sort of been brought about by, I'm sure, the raised profile of AI over the last 6 months, since really ChatGPT at the end of November, I think it was November 30th, came upon us or was launched, and within 5 days reached 1 million users. Since then, the conversation around AI has reached a sort of fever pitch. A lot of people have started using AI who probably hadn't even heard of it before, let alone had any opportunities to use it. It's become clear that tools like ChatGPT have become great productivity tools for people to use. We use ChatGPT and others ourselves for some areas with a degree of caution. Like human beings, it does err sometimes. So it's definitely something to use with caution, but it also brings great productivity benefits. But it's also opened up the wider question of the use of AI, not only in that sort of personal and this sort of what's almost become a consumer market now for AI, but also back to the conversation around the use of AI. And along with that, the value of data within enterprises. It's brought to the fore that discussion about managing enterprise data, utilizing and monetizing that data. I was just at a conference yesterday put on by IBM where that was the theme of that. It's a challenge for organizations, but it's where the real value exists. Just returning to the sort of productivity angle, ChatGPT and other tools that have come into the market, and I think there's a list of tools, future tools, .io, where there's some 1,800 AI-enabled tools now mentioned or listed. And there's various other lists of a similar kind with these lists. There's been an explosion of these sort of personal productivity tools. It's become much like the spreadsheet or Excel of the current generation. The ease of use, the utility, and it's not for a particular application, it's for many different applications. It's very flexible and so on. And as a result, we're all using it in our day-to-day lives. It's sort of democratized AI. But there are issues that have come up, the accuracy, some of the legal aspects, regulation, and so on. And these are some of the things we'll cover today. But mostly we'd like to really cover where the opportunities lie going forward. The seeds have been sown. There's many potential opportunities that this sort of explosion of productivity tools point to, but there's also these other opportunities that exist within the sort of enterprise marketplace as well. And we hope to explore those. And in starting with that, our first speaker today will be Matt Turck from First Mark Capital. But first, just to sort of illustrate the scale of the opportunity, there's a chart or some data recently released by S&P Global that showed their projections for the growth of particularly the generative AI market. And it's been the generative AI market that's taken on the narrative around AI since the launch of ChatGPT. ChatGPT being sort of in that category of applications around generative AI and underpinned by large language model AI technology, which has very much taken the attention and the focus of AI investment and where people see a lot of the potential growth for AI. And this chart demonstrates just the extent of that growth, particularly right now, as we're in the early stages and we're seeing the largest opportunities for growth. So this is the time to sort of get in, but it's also the time where there are perhaps the most risks because it's early in the investment cycle. But certainly if you look at this growth curve, it's most extreme at the start and then starts to tail off. Still fairly healthy when we get to 2028, and we're going from a market of around 8 million today, or 8 billion, sorry, today, to 36 billion plus in just a few years by 2028. So lots of opportunity, some things to be mindful of, some risks to try and mitigate, and these are things we hope to talk to today. So I'd like to just welcome our speakers. First will be Matt Turck. We'll follow that with Ollie Forsyth and Ed Klaris to talk about generative AI, and then we'll have a panel at the end where our speakers will be joined by Florian Kahlert and Mihkel Jäätma. But first, over to you, Matt. Can you maybe give a quick introduction, say a little bit about the mad landscape that we've put up there and what that's all about, and a little bit of the history to it. And I think also if you could mention the data-driven meetup that you've been hosting for the last decade and how that sort of gives you a perspective on the market that's perhaps certainly longer and gives you that sort of sense of what's been going on and building up to where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. So my name is Matt Turck. I'm a partner at Firstmark, as you mentioned. Firstmark is an early stage venture firm based in New York. We do both consumer and enterprise investing. We've invested over the years in a number of companies, including Pinterest and Shopify and Discord and Airbnb, and then a bunch of companies on the enterprise side, including infrastructure, all the way to applications. I'm one of the 5 investing partners, and I've been particularly passionate about the world of data, machine learning, and AI throughout my career, but in particular as an investor. So I typically come in early, invest at the seed level, Series A level, in companies in the space. So over the years, I've invested in companies like Dataiku, which is a global leader for enterprise AI, targeting global 2,000 companies. CockroachDB, ClickHouse, more on the infrastructure side, and more recently companies like Synthesia, which is a generative AI company that maybe we'll talk about in a minute. So I actively invest in the space, but as a way to go very deep in the space, there's a couple of things I do. So one of them is that mad landscape that you just mentioned, John, which is has been a little bit of a labor of love that I've done annually for the last 10 plus years, which is basically one of those big market maps, an attempt at making sense of all the noise out there, through data, big data, the modern data stack, and then AI, deep learning, classical AI, generative AI, and all those things. So trying to just capture everything in terms of all the emerging startups and products in the space. I do that every year, and it's an opportunity for me to just sit down every year and spend several weeks just reading everything and learning about all the new companies in the space. So you can find an interactive version of it at mad.firstmark.com. And then you can find the text, the sort of blog posts that go with it on my blog at mattturck.com, MATTTURCK.com. So that's the landscape. And then the second sort of big project that I've been, again, doing for 10 plus years is Data-Driven NYC, which is basically a big meetup, like monthly event kind of thing, which over the years has become a 19,000 person community, basically the largest data and AI meetup in the country, which has been a wonderful way of just having conversations with some of the best speakers, and then doing my bit to help build the data and AI community in New York and beyond.
In having done these various projects for the last decade or so, how do you look at what we're seeing today, and perhaps also since the latest release of the Mad Landscape, which I think was back in February or March of this year, and there's just been a lot of tempo and fast pace of things going on since then. So be interesting, just, you know, how you've seen the last 10 years and how you've seen the last 3 months in the context of that.
Yeah. So look, from my perspective, and you know, mostly from an enterprise investor perspective, I think there's, I think it's helpful to take a step back and pretty much, as you suggested, John, look at this over a period of time. So for me, it's all part of the same mega trend, which has been happening for the last, you know, 15 or 20 years, which is the rise of data and data powered applications in the enterprise and beyond. So for me, you know, big data, automation, the modern data stack, deep learning, classical AI, generative AI, all of those are different stages and facets of the same thing. To be able to have any kind of AI strategy in the enterprise today, you need to have your data house in order. So you do need to have Snowflake or Databricks or whatever repository. Do you need to have a way of ingesting your data into those repositories? You do need to have a way of extracting data out of those repositories and fit it into machine learning models. I like to think of it as a continuum rather than, you know, a major revolution that just somehow happened in the last 3 months. That's first and foremost. Now, if we focus on the last 3 months, you know, even the last 3 months, that's also like a mini continuum. If you ask anybody on the machine learning engineering side, you know, everybody has known for at least the last couple of years that this evolution of transformers, which started in 2017, was incredibly powerful. But, you know, the secret was reasonably well kept because it was, you know, ultimately a small number of people that had access to GPT-2 and then GPT-3. But nobody was particularly surprised when ChatGPT came out in that small group of people that knew. So ChatGPT, you used the term democratization, John. I think that's exactly that. It's really when the rest of the world caught on to the fact that this was this you know, incredibly powerful thing, but, you know, not new news for others. Now, having said that, I think it's one of those interesting moments when the hype, which, as we all know, is kind of overwhelming, is actually justified. You know, we've all gone through cycles for different technologies where the hype was unbearable, but like everybody was asking, okay, what are the use cases? What, you know, is this ready for prime time? Like all the things. And it's, and look, even in AI itself, you know, I've been at Firstmark for 10 years. This is my third AI hype cycle. The first one was around, you know, 2012, 2013, when, you know, deep learning, which had been around for a long time from an algorithmic standpoint, really came into its own after the ImageNet competition in 2012. So there's like a big hype cycle around then. And then sometime around like 2015, 2016, there was another hype cycle this time around, you know, chatbots. Like everybody was super excited about chatbots, and, you know, that sort of died down. And so this is my third hype cycle. And like, you know, I fully expect that the same thing will happen, which is, okay, now there's a frenzy, like everybody is extremely excited, but, you know, almost inevitably at some point it's going to die down. But having said that, I do think it's a very important moment, and that you know, there is a real acceleration there that, regardless of what I mentioned around the continuum, is really worth thinking through, because it's going to have all sorts of profound implications for the enterprise in particular, but, you know, the world in general.
So in terms of investment, sometimes can be almost like fashion. It sort of goes one direction, whatever the fashion is, and it goes in another direction. In some ways, generative AI is kind of today's fashion. It's where the money is sort of being directed, the excitement and the hype is. Are we missing anything in there? Is there sort of like this sort of crowd everyone following the crowd type of thing going on. And in there, we're just missing out on some other great opportunities that are getting lost in all that.
Yeah, look, so it's certainly a moment when like the whole herd has moved to AI overnight. And, you know, from the perspective of somebody like me, and look, like I'm, you know, I've been doing work in this space for a very long time now, but, you know, I'm not the only one. Like there's a handful of VCs that have been big believers in AI for a bit. So from the perspective of that group, it's actually a pretty tricky time to be investing, at least for what we do, which is early stage investing. And we, you know, maybe it's different for growth, maybe it's different for public market investors. But from our perspective, it's sort of, you know, very hard to tell companies apart. There is this massive influx of companies, which are often very new or started in the last 6 months or so. And, you know, once you have enough of a deal flow there and see a good amount of those companies, it's just really hard. Like everybody just sound the same, wants to do the same thing. Whatever idea one may think is kind of original or catchy or interesting, there's like another, you know, 20 companies trying to do exactly the same. So in some ways, I've been less active than you would think. You would think that like this would be my big moment that I've been like waiting for the last few years, and I'd be like rushing and doing like a new deal every year. But I'm sort of doing the opposite. Like I've done a couple of very early stage things recently, largely based on the quality of the founders. But other than that, I'm like actually sort of, I wouldn't say I'm slowing down, but I'm keeping my pace of investing sort of even. So I think that's hard. And my general approach is to let the dust settle a little bit over the next few months and maybe year, and then hopefully some of the better companies will start emerging and actually releasing products that, you know, a customer will actually use. So that's been my main approach. In terms of what's overlooked, you know, I think there's not much from an investing perspective that's not really looked at these days. Like everything seems to be under the microscope. The minute you have like AI or machine learning mentioned anywhere in the company description. But from an enterprise adoption perspective, I think there's a little bit of a misconception that I'm seeing quite a bit of, which is that this wave of AI is so overwhelming in terms of like hype and noise and all the things that people tend to naturally jump to the conclusion that generative AI is AI, all of AI, when in reality it's really not. It's you know, it's one of the descendants of this, you know, big bang that happened 10 years ago around deep learnings. It's really, generative AI is really focused on NLP, NLG, and, you know, multimodal, but largely the world of like unstructured data and unstructured information. And people tend to then assume that everything before that, including stuff that is, you know, 2 years old, is like classical AI. So like people are very quick to jump to the sort of creating that moniker, when in reality, I think the way to think about it is structured data versus unstructured data. So generative AI, as we just said, is very much unstructured data. But you know, the real in sort of profound and obvious use cases in the enterprise currently, you know, while we kind of make sense of like how to use generative AI in the enterprise, the current use cases are actually very much on structured data. And there actually is a number of companies around the world that have been deploying AI in production at scale for real business use cases with real ROI for a number of years now. But those use cases have been around structured data. So, you know, classical use case is churn prediction. All right, so here's my pattern around the customers that have churned. Now let's look at those new customers, predict out of that list which ones are the most likely to churn, right? Or there's also different things, as you know, fraud detection and like cyber attack detection, all other things. There's like a million actual use cases. And I think that the big, not risk, but the sort of the weird thing that people have been doing is sort of like assume that none of this matters, when in reality it's generating extraordinary business value. And generative AI is just it's very important, but it's just like the a new part of this, and that needs to be looked at as holistically.
We need to sort of stand back a little bit and look at the bigger picture.
Yeah,
so
which is like enterprise AI has been a thing, will continue to being a thing, and companies need to have a holistic strategy around deploying AI in the to do also different things, part of which being around structured data use cases, which are already in production around the world, and that new breed of generative AI use cases.
So Matt, can I, sort of mindful of time, can I just ask one last question? I think as a follow-up to your mad landscape, you talked a little bit about an expectation of market consolidation, particularly around the data technologies area. But I'm wondering if you're seeing that might happen also quite quickly in terms of AI, because there is just so many of these sort of new tools out there, and it seems that, the market can't sustain the number there is, but they're also new, which is hard for a market to consolidate around. So just wondering, your sort of final thoughts on that side of things, just where the market might head, consolidation and those types of things.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that the world of data infrastructure, modern data stack, and so on and so forth has been ripe for consolidation, but that's in large part because the big bang around company creation and VC funding really happened 3 or 4 years ago. Sometimes before and around the Snowflake IPO. So, the frenzy that we're seeing in generative AI, we saw in the world of data infrastructure, except, data infrastructure is much more of a sort of a B2B nerdy area. So, it never went, it never became top of mind like the way generative AI has become for the broad public. But, the same thing sort of happened, and you did have an explosion of companies that were started, and you fast forward to today, a lot of those companies are now like 3 or 4 years old, have raised money, and some of them are doing well, some of them are not, and as the market clarifies, some of those companies are just going to start running out of money and going to need to find a home. And so I think we are going to see a bunch of that, and unfortunately, some companies' failures as well in data infrastructure. If you now fast forward to today and look at the generative AI, which again, all of us are related in my opinion, but generative AI is at the beginning of that cycle. Where everybody's starting their company, a bunch of ERVCs that may or may not have spent a lot of time in the space are happily funding them, and prices and valuations are rapidly increasing. So sort of what we are unwinding in the data infrastructure world, we're in the process of rebuilding in generative AI, which is like the boom and bust cycles of the industry. And I don't think there's going to be short-term consolidation in generative AI, because VCs are going to continue happily funding those companies. So like all the seed companies that are getting created now, a lot of them are going to raise a Series A. And yes, there'll be some consolidation, some acquisitions, like we saw Databricks buy a vector database just a couple of weeks ago. There's rumors maybe that will be announced next week at the Snowflake summit, but there were like rumors that Snowflake bought, acqui-hired some LLM related companies. So we're going to see some of that, but those acquisitions are going to be very expensive for what they are. So there'll be small companies acquired for a lot of money, and we're going to see some of them, but not a lot of them. So for generative AI to start consolidating, I think it's going to take a couple of years before anything meaningful happens. And maybe there'll be like the occasional very large, flat, splashy deal. That's always one of those, but none in the short term as a general market trend. I don't think.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Matt. That was some great insights there. At this point, if we can just sort of switch over to our second fireside chat. As we're talking a lot about generative AI today, this is the fireside chat that's all about generative AI. So we've got two guests here today. We've got Ed Klaris, who is a lawyer. He's actually a former colleague of mine at Oakland's De Silva and Phillips. His area of practice has been around media and IP, and increasingly, I think, around AI. But I'll let Ed say a little bit more about his background, but also first, if I can introduce Ollie Forsyth, who is an investor with Antler, which is a VC firm, I think in the UK, but also more broadly. And currently Ollie is out in Vietnam and looking at opportunities in that part of the world. So I can sort of hand over to both of you to just sort of give a little bit more intro about yourself. And also, if you can, in giving that intro, just offer your sort of initial thoughts on the generative AI landscape from your own sort of vantage points.
Ed, you can give us.
Okay, thank you, Ollie. Thanks, John. And Matt, thank you. That was an interesting talk. So I'm a lawyer. I run a law firm and a consulting firm that's called Klaris IP. And we work with media companies, entertainment companies, technology companies all around creation of content, whether it's audio, audiovisual, or digital and publishing. And I've been doing this for some time. I've watched an industry grow from really just print and broadcast to, and with very few technology tools, to a highly tool-based business where all content is created through pretty sophisticated pieces of software. And I think that Matt's right, that we've seen this growth in and more sophistication in software to help us predict how content is going to do online, help us see engagement, help us create content. Think about animation. It used to be that you have to draw every single image 24 per second. And now, of course, animation is created largely through technology. So there's been generative content creation through software for years. And now we've gotten to a place where the use of the word artificial intelligence is being focused on a lot more than ever. I think it's largely a marketing effort more so than a reality, because we've really been doing that. And I think from a lawyer's point of view, what we're seeing now is all of the emphasis on the underlying technology that's helping us to generate content, like music and art and movies and television and avatars and interactive video games. And what that's doing is it's starting to pique the interest in the regulatory organizations around the world. Rather than quietly allowing content to be created through software, where you could put a camera in the woods and wait a month before a lioness came to suckle her cubs. And who was the photographer of that picture that was taken by itself in the woods? Really nobody. It was the camera that took the picture because of motion capture. But the photographer who was sitting back at the lodge actually took credit for it. Now what we have is a situation where regulators and judges and legislators are worried that when humans aren't part of the creation of content, it's not really protectable and not really copyrightable. And therefore, we're getting to we have this dual concern or issue. One is AI has a lot of market value, and like Matt said, we've seen some cycles, some hype cycles around AI, but now it's really being focused on as somehow machine generated content, and taking the unstructured data, which might be sentences and paragraphs, and it might be audio and visual content. And you got the European Union that's always very concerned about taking other people's content in order to create somebody else's. And the EU has already come out and said that anybody scraping data and using it to create content has to report back to those who actually own it. The United States has already come out and said that any purely machine generated content is not copyrightable and therefore not protectable and is in the public domain. So there's this worry on my part that because of the hype factor and the focus on how machines are generating content and not how people are actually curating it by using a tool like they've been using CGI forever, like they've been using Photoshop forever, we're going to end up in a situation where there's a lot more legal risk than I think really needs to be. And so I'm being approached all the time by people who have music companies and art companies and et cetera, who want to generate their own content through these algorithms. And I have to be much more concerned about what the reaction will be because of the heightened awareness. So I help places like large movie and television studios work with new partners these days who are developing apps that can do incredible things with avatars. For example, take an actor, turn them into an avatar, and have them appear in a movie without ever actually showing up. Some of the software is really remarkable. Some of it is not so great, but I am seeing huge advances, and it's exciting. And there's a lot of questions for lawyers because of the impact of scraping and using training data. And then there's the question of what's the output look like, and is it somehow infringing, and are you using other people's name and likeness without authority? And so it's been a fascinating sort of run here as we've focused on what people are calling artificial intelligence.
So Ollie, if you can talk a little bit about what you've been doing in the area, the landscape maps that you've produced, and just quickly, here's a example of one you produced, I think, a couple of months ago, and I'm sure this has sort of moved on from there. Just give us, a little bit about your background, what you do about Antler, and also just how you see this world and how you see it evolving, and maybe just with some reference to some of Ed's comments there, in terms of the legal side of things and so on.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for hosting. Hi, everyone. Very nice to meet you. My name's Ollie from Antler. We're a global early stage fund investing in companies from the day zero all the way up to when they start becoming really exciting tech companies. We have roughly 900 portfolio companies now, 25 offices around the world. I'm normally based in Thailand, but here in Vietnam. Lots of really exciting generative AI companies coming up, and heading to India next week, where there's also so much hype happening about the space. So excited to be meeting some founders. Some of you may have read the first generative AI report, which was published back in December last year. And it's been amazing and mind-blowing just how much the space has changed in such a short period of time. We actually wrote the whole report in about 5 days. We used a bit of support from some of these platforms, and I think it's really exciting. I mean, similar to what Matt mentioned earlier, he's been through a couple of AI cycles. I also cover the creator economy and have done for the last couple of years. And, it also reminds me about the space when the creator economy first emerged, properly, a couple of years ago. There were 200 to 300 companies all tapping into the space very, very quickly. And then similar to what the speakers have mentioned today, a couple of years later, those companies either don't work out, a couple of them do materialize, and a couple of them fail. And similar to what Matt mentioned earlier, we're going to probably see this with the generative AI space as well. as the space materializes, some companies won't work out, some will get acquired, or the whole space may go into a completely new direction, right? But I think the space is really interesting. We've backed about 40 companies in the space now, across pretty much all verticals. Some of the trends which we saw taking shape from the reports we published last year, outside of the US, India is a massive market, followed by Israel. Lots of super interesting technologies being created. Where I see the two biggest trends probably happening, or at least some of them, referring to the creator economy, which I also mentioned. One of the biggest challenges creators face is they can only be so global in their spoken language, right? So if John is the creator, only speaks English, he can only produce content into that spoken language. With generative AI today, there are new technologies emerging where creators can now be global from day one. So they can create content and upload it into any language using the creator's voice and visuals. I think that's absolutely a massive game changer, for the creator economy as a whole, as the creators can now be, global from day one. What's interesting about the creator economy space, referring to creators, we also produce a annual creator economy report, and we interviewed a bunch of creators a couple of months ago, and actually only 25% of them have used generative AI. So not many of them are using the technology yet, but I think as case studies start to materialize and demonstrate, how valuable it can be, similar to what Ed mentioned, right? It can save so much time. But however, their biggest concern, again, actually what Ed mentioned was, well, how do I know where there's, where my content's going to go, right? I own this content, and they're slightly cautious of letting technologies use the product if they're not going to have any copyright over it. Finally, I think the second opportunity in this space is around e-commerce. So, we spend so much time searching for the perfect product for our wardrobe or for our house. In the future, these AI algorithms will automatically recognize the types of items we want to have in our home or in our wardrobe, and generative AI products, can show you what they look like on you or in your house. And I think we're just at the beginning, but I think finally, just to mention, every company will have a generative AI strategy or AI strategy at some stage. I think it's just a case of time.
So just pick up on that last point. What do you think that actually looks like when you say every company will have an AI or generative AI strategy? It's something that's sort of easy to say, and people will say this about a lot of new things. You have a strategy and this, that, and the other. What do you feel that really looks like to be successful?
I think when I say that, it will be different for each company, right? And every company will have its own goals. Is it around how to be more productive? Is it around how to save costs? It'll be different for each company. I think we're still pretty early stage on what that looks like, but at the end of the day, if these companies can make their colleagues, employees 10 times more productive by saving a bit of capital, that's one way of also looking at it.
And can I ask sort of both of you, we talked here a lot about the creator economy. So there seems to be a really strong intersection between the interest that started up, I guess, 2-3 years ago around this sort of thing called the creator economy, and then the availability of these tools. And although you're saying, Ollie, that there's maybe not at the moment the majority of creators using them, it's sort of heading that direction. But there's another area of sort of creators that's got a lot of discussion recently, and that's software creators. And that seems to have emerged as one of the big opportunities around generative AI. So I'm sort of interested in both your thoughts on that as an area of opportunity, the impact on software development itself, because that impacts everything we're talking about in a sense. And also, Ed, from your sort of perspective, the sort of IP issues related to that, and opportunities at the same time.
Okay. You want to go first, Ollie?
Yeah, sure. Software creators, I mean, this is still pretty early, right? I actually haven't spent a huge amount of time in the software creator space. We've seen some some emerging trends, but maybe Ed, you can provide some insights first. You may have some further insights.
I see software development trends for sure. I mean, you can use algorithms that can complete your source code, if that's what you're asking. And
that sort of thing, where it's become a sort of productivity tool for
right.
software creators.
Sure.
Themselves. So
you can,
amongst that community.
Yeah, I mean, source code creation through algorithms is definitely a use case. And it's similar to what I said earlier around animation. You know, you start the thread with your own human created content, and then the algorithm can continue that along and make you much more efficient. There's been cases in Australia, in the UK, not yet in the United States, around AI generated source code. Mostly the concern is that if you focus on the fact that algorithms are writing the code, you know, will the authorities determine that code is not protectable as copyrighted because and source code is a literary property under the US Copyright Act, and it can be copyrighted if it's generated by a human being. If it's generated by a piece of software, then as of right now, it falls into the public domain. So again, I think that the focus on algorithm created source code through marketing and hyping is actually going to bite us in the end, because we're going to be in a situation where a lot of our software is not going to be copyrightable. And that gives me some concern. So I do think that there's great productivity gains potentially, and I think that tools that help you with productivity are important. So I want to make this quick distinction. In my view of the world, a tool, a piece of software that helps you be productive, is merely a tool like a camera or a video camera that helps the creator create something, as long as the creator has some sense of what they can predict will come out of the tool. If it's predictable, then the creator is the copyright holder. If what comes out of the tool is unpredictable, is generated without any sense of what's going to happen, and is published without curation, then it's not protectable. So it's important how people talk about their pieces of software. And as we go into a world where generative AI is going to be incorporated into a lot more of our software.
Before we sort of close and head over to the panel, Ollie, do you have any sort of final thoughts on this? Again, from the research you've done, the investments you've made, maybe how you see things at the end of this year different to how they are today after this sort of first 6 months of a lot of interest, a lot of hype, some noise and everything else. You know, what we learn from that will inform and lead to where we end up at the end of the year. Yeah. And Ed, if you could sort of chime in as well on any of that.
I think it's really difficult, to be honest. So when we published the landscape back in December, I thought we pretty much covered all the platforms which have emerged. 6 months later, there are not just 200, 300 companies. There are now like 1,500 companies, right? So it's really hard to keep up. And similar to what we've been discussing this evening, this is just a hype cycle, right? We are going to see some form of consolidation, right? That's going to happen over the next few months, maybe towards the end of the year. It needs to happen, right? Because there can only be so many winners in each category. And again, referring to the creator economy, which we've been doing for the last couple of years, companies come and go. There'll be a couple of winners in each category. Then next year or the year after, there's going to be another big trend, which we're all going to tap into. Yeah, too early to tell, I would say, but I think it's a really exciting category to watch.
Yeah, I guess I'll say that I think that it's important that people try to solve for use cases as opposed to hyping the underlying technology. If the economy is improved by what they're offering and people can see real ROI on what they're using, then they'll continue to use that product. If they overhype the fact that the underlying software uses some artificial intelligence, those companies are banking on things that I think are just not ultimately going to add to the overall value in the economy.
Thank you so much for this. It's been a great discussion, a lot of insights there. There'd be a lot more if we had longer, which we did, but unfortunately we don't. But I think if anyone wants to sort of take up any questions with you, then are both of you okay with people sort of reaching out to you and sort of asking any questions they may have or this type of thing?
I'm happy to take questions. People contact me often at my law firm, clarislaw.com, and we have 18 lawyers, and many of us practice in this area, and I'm happy personally to take inquiries.
Yes, of course. Best just add me on LinkedIn and we can have a chat.
And at this point, I'll hand over to Joni, who's going to moderate the panel.
Thanks, John. Let's discuss some other themes that are shaping the future of the business in increasingly AI-driven world. So, as pretty much all have heard this point, that there's a saying that data is a new oil. So we could start with the proprietary data. And Florian, let's start with you. Given your background in ad tech and insight business, could you share your perspective how companies can leverage the proprietary data as a competitive advantage? And of course, there are some risks involved, so feel free to share them as well.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for inviting me, and so it's exciting to be here today. I was thinking about this ahead of the webinar a little bit about the proprietary data. And yes, in a lot of ways, it is the new oil. I ran companies in the insight space, and those companies sometimes owned the data, and sometimes they didn't own the data. And there's proprietary data for you to begin with. And if you don't own the data, you're essentially a commodity business. You may be good with your algorithms, you may be good with your models, but ultimately you're relying on somebody else's data. And if they change their minds, which they often do, it may go away overnight and then you have nothing. Then, and that is a problem. So proprietary data for insights business is definitely a key in terms of value creation. And proprietary data for companies that are in the business of providing other services is obviously an incredible opportunity to do better. We already see this with how retail businesses use their data to predict purchases, to predict future purchases, to drive advertising. It has been out there for a very long time, actually. Where it becomes interesting is once you make predictions that are kind of like not so obvious. And this is also where the challenges of the data, of the proprietary data, come in. Your proprietary data may be really good, whether it's structured or unstructured, doesn't really matter, may be really good in the sphere that you are active in, but you have blind spots. You don't know anything about what happens outside your business, and people have lots of other things that they do. So your proprietary data in many, many ways, unless you're an Amazon, is probably very limited and very focused on your business. And it limits your ability to predict things and expand into areas that are outside the original scope of what you do. And this is where it becomes an AI thing that is quite interesting, is once you start recognizing this and you are actually working with other data sets, you're building data lakes, and you are having artificial intelligence, machine learning, creating and connecting these data sets without having actually PII or without having unique identifiers between them, and putting them together and really broadening your scope. Those are like the opportunities that sit out there. When I ran Helixa, that was one of the things that they did, like taking multiple data sets and allowing them to work together without them actually being connected to each other. And that creates a massively larger opportunity to understand and predict and make decisions about what you want to do. So proprietary data is key if you're an insights company, is key when you want to do anything to create value, but be aware that you want to create connections to other data sets to really enrich it. And AI can be an incredible help, and machine learning can be an incredible help to do that.
Yeah, thanks. It's quite a big area to focus on, and that we could spend probably an hour or two
Oh yeah,
among that. But yeah, maybe then one topic before we jump to the next one is of course how to adopt or use the machine learning in a big scale operations, because most of the new companies are operating quite small scale at this point. So if you could share briefly your insight on that as well.
Sure. Second question for me. I love it. Sorry, Mihkel, you'll be on next. I think on the large scale operation, and I thought about this too, is what I recognized as we're building a company and as we are hired machine learning engineers, aside from the fact that it is incredibly difficult to find them, they fall often into two camps. There are, first of all, most of them that I met, they are incentivized by trying to do something new. They're in this field because they want to explore. They're explorers. They want to like figure out what's possible. They want to be at the edge of those new things. They want to try new things over and over again. And that is incredibly important, incredibly helpful. But that does ignore often the constraints to make it scalable in a large scale operation, right? Because exploring, you want an expansive mindset, but when you are actually trying to make something in a large scale operation, you have a reductive mindset. Suddenly cost, speed, data availability become a much larger concern or constraint in terms of what you can actually do. And so finding the right mix of people that are expansive enough to get you into the new areas, but then having people who love to make things operationally workable in a large scale operation is really important. Because if you have just the academic ML guy who wants to do all new, he can do great things with model data. But when you then try to like do this in real time for thousands of users and terabytes of data sets, it suddenly doesn't work, or it's cost prohibitive. So you need to have a balance between the two. And that is something that even as a small company, you need to figure out what your talent pool looks like. You need to have a good mix of people who have an expansive mindsets to do new things, but also some that have a reductive mindset and are incentivized and like to make machines work efficiently in a larger scale with the constraints of cost, speed, data availability, etc. So that's like one of the core underlying things that we found that is often a different skill set and a different personality of the people that you ultimately have to hire.
Yeah. Thanks. It's a very insightful. Mihkel, let's jump to you. Sorry about the timing. It seems to be a lot of talk about the good topics. So, from your extensive experience in AI computer vision domain, how you see the proprietary data? For example, company like Realize, which you are running currently. So, let's start.
Yeah. Yes. So we are indeed specialists in computer vision data. Decade of building it up from scratch. And having collected over like 10 million people's reactions to videos that they watch online. So we have that perspective from both sort of selling data to others to help build their models and commercializing the models ourselves. And I definitely agree with Matt that, this whole Gen AI topic is 20-year trend, but within it, there's absolutely a sort of a post and pre ChatGPT era as well. So to answer your question, how important it is that it's proprietary, the first question now that we get that nobody ever asked, even very few people asked 7 months ago, is like, where did your training data come from? Is it yours? Like that wasn't even asked. And now that's the first question. Is it legal? And you don't even go to the how much it is and how good it is. So that has changed. I think it's good for everything, and about time to pay attention to it. But then, you know, any AI, old, new, future, I mean, it's still, performance is the function of, you know, how much right data it has, and having that underpins everything. So what is right? I mean, for us in our computer vision use case, it is, you know, size matters everywhere. I mean, it's definitely a function of how much you have it and how recent it is, but also the diversity, right? So a lot of computer vision stuff is very artificial, trained against some not real data, because it's been very hard to actually get scaled real life video data that comes with training rights. So cover all backgrounds of people in different real life situations. You know, you need to have that in your proprietary data. And especially in this field, because our business is using that computer vision to understand, you know, basically human feedback to feed into other AI to make it better, understanding things like emotions and even identity. It has to be real data. You can't really get by with synthetic data. I mean, there's many other things you can do with synthetic data a lot better, but we've found out that it still comes with so many priors that if you actually want to know if that's a happy person in Brazil, or is that deep fake or a real person, you know, you actually do need that real data to factor in. So those are the sort of the key 3 pillars that factor into our proprietary data.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. How about then, I assume that you have some insights for the virtual or augmented reality as well, which has been picking up or going up and down for recently. So how do you see, what are the critical factors there? And of course, some dynamics which has changed it over to maybe the last couple of years, given the certain technology development, etc.
Yeah, so we are of a firm opinion that the most important VR AR device, at least for the next 5 years, will be your phone. It is today, and it still can do many more wonderful things going forward. So that's not going to change as fast as maybe some people think. But this generative AI will change, you know, how we interact with that phone in fundamental ways. And the sort of the two things that we work on most is first, all sorts of AI agents for multiple purposes that are going to get better. So it's sort of a ChatSpot 3.0 extension. I think these are going to get really good. They're going to look like people. They're going to be much better than the people we talk on customer support lines right now, and within apps, across apps, personally everywhere. So that's going to change and be the virtual part of the world on our phones, probably. And then content generation, we've already started to talk about it. More and more of it will be, you know, generated real time per user, not going through this process of 5 different companies and 10 people involved until anything goes out from an enterprise. So there was this point made that it's all about use cases, like you said, Ed, right? We think a lot about where does the first billion of actual money and value in generative AI come from, and those are the two things that we believe is AI content generation and human-like chatbots. They can just make customer support and content generations, you know, so much better than how it's been done so far. So it's really using the AI not to do the old things better, but finding it to do things in a new, better way.
Yeah. I wonder how the work looks in that and in 5 years or so, but we'll probably see that as well. So maybe if we round it up and then maybe go just a brief round, if Matt and Ed has a couple of words as well. So Matt, where would you focus at this point in a value chain, or then maybe where's the worth of investing money or time now at this point in the world of AI, especially?
Where would I focus from an investment perspective?
Yeah, either from the investment time or money. Of course, it varies quite a bit.
Yeah, so and I was actually talking about this in the chat a minute ago. So one reason why investing is tricky, as mentioned, is that like this is a lot of companies and it's hard to like tell them apart. Another reason why investing is tricky right now at the early stage is that big tech has been a very different time of incumbent. So we all love the stories of the little startup that goes against the sleepy incumbents and disrupt them, and the sleepy incumbent cannot innovate because innovator dilemma and all the things. Unfortunately, it's from our perspective as venture investors, it's not one of the situations. It's actually a very different type of situation where the incumbents are reacting almost more aggressively than startups. And that's something that one needs to think about quite a bit. So my general perspective is that, look, ultimately, I believe that startups will find a way because they always do. But having said that, I think the broad horizontal stuff is harder. So I think, consumer search, maybe if you open AI, you can go after it. But I'd argue that, OpenAI is not, at this point, not really a startup anymore, given the unprecedented amounts of cash it's raised through Microsoft. But for anybody else, I think it's harder. I think the broad sort of horizontal stuff is harder as well. I mean, it's hard to imagine when you see some of those applications. When we're talking about code generation, GitHub Copilot and GPT-4 have had a head start on this. I think it's just harder for a startup to like come out and do like a broad sort of horizontal code generation type of thing. So from a venture investing perspective, we tend to like companies that are focused on very specific use cases. Often, although not always, that means vertical. So taking generative AI for whatever health or finance or whatever domain, or very specific part of the enterprise. I don't know, HR or and companies that try to start with that very narrow aperture, and then we'll see if they can expand from there. From an infrastructure perspective, we tend to like stuff that has to do with the way enterprise deploy generative AI, because there will always be something specific about the company's data, as Florian was mentioning earlier, just bringing enterprise specific data into generative AI. So that kind of like infrastructure, kind of like a last mile between like generative AI and a very specific context of an enterprise. I think that's harder to displace systematically for big tech. So we like that as well. So in other words, it's much less obvious than you would think, where you might want to invest your time and effort either as a founder or as a venture investor.
Well, I don't really do any investing, I guess, so I won't comment on that. I'll defer to my other esteemed colleagues. But I believe in use case development as opposed to underlying technology. I think that that's where your value is going to be created. The places where I'm seeing it and where there's some controversy, narrators on audiobook narrators are, that's an interesting little space where an artificial voice can read. And we're having a lot of conversations with the authors of the books around whether an artificial voice can read their book and how that will come out. There's metadata management, clip management, the way in which content is surfaced in big companies that have millions of pieces of content, that is sort of the metadata that gets generated and gets accreted to that piece of content is a very interesting use case, which I'm seeing a lot of. Software development is very important. And I guess that those are areas. And then, of course, the writers' strike, which has been an immense thing for the entertainment business, is focused on things like the size of the writers' room, because they're concerned that writers will be less needed when AI is generating content. That's sort of a byproduct of the overhype of AI. I think that we're a long way off from that, but we're in fact in a strike situation here where one of the factors is something that I don't even believe is real. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing.
I just kind of repeat what I said. We are focused on AI content generation. I think the new technologies provide new ways of doing things more effectively than 5 companies than 10 people talking to each other. If you have good models, they are actually better at talking to each other than people in some situations, and that's what we're looking to leverage.
Yeah, I think the next step from where I see this right now, and this is more me as a consumer for aware and being around the content for a while, the next step of what needs to happen is figuring out how that content that gets generated by AI gets curated and checked and made into something that actually is real, right? There was an article today, I think in The Guardian, about a large German paper that started like generating articles purely on AI. I think there was another article just the other day where there's somebody had to apologize because an AI article was misrepresenting things. So the writers who used to write the articles have to become actually editors to curate that content. And if you don't know what that content is supposed to be, you're still going to be in trouble, because you ultimately, and this goes to you, Ed, people need to have an idea of what comes out, or they should have an idea of what comes out, and they still need to have a subject matter expertise in order to check and verify of what AI is doing. Otherwise, we're ending up with 3-legged chickens and all these kind of things that are just going to be out there. And that's going to be initially, that's part of the hype. It will initially happen, but this is where it gets reined in, because ultimately we need to figure out, and companies and industries need to figure out how to make it, again, just a tool to achieve a business outcome, not something that gets applied to willy-nilly everything, because there's great opportunity, but it requires some thought in terms of how it actually achieves your business outcome. And in the content generation, it's going to be a little scary for a while, I have to feel like.
Yeah. We've already had our first defamation cases. We've already had our first lawyers being disbarred for submitting briefs that were not checked. You know, the ramifications are already starting.
So firstly, I'd like to thank all our speakers. Two of them, Ollie and Matt, had to leave before the end, but we ran over a little bit. So I'd like to thank you all, those who are still here, our attendees who are still here, for sticking in there. I hope everyone found this of great value and helpful in terms of decisions you may have to make as investors or entrepreneurs, or in other areas that bring you into contact with this whole developing area around AI and around generative AI and such like. And we'll also be publishing an article that'll be a sort of summary of the webinar, and probably a few extra things added in terms of some additional insights and goings on in the industry. So we'll make sure everyone gets a copy of that when that comes out. But again, I'd just like to thank everyone for taking part.
Thank you for having us.